So the first deleted scene to talk about is the introduction of Renard, played by Robert Carlyle. Now, one of the entertaining things about the film is that the audience is led along to believe that Robert's character is the real villain of the piece. But those that know the story know that he wasn't. But what we had to do is really to establish him and try and give him a really big entrance into the film so that people would immediately think, this is the villain. So we shot this scene and we looked at it and we thought, this is not very impressive entrance if this is going to be the great villain of the film. And then we thought, well, he doesn't appear again for at least another 25 minutes where he does have a very good entrance. So why are we bothering to do this little entrance when there's a much bigger entrance coming up later on? So that was one reason why we wanted to cut it out. The other reason was we thought it would be nicer really not to know who the cigarette girl was working for. Once you know she's working for Renard, a whole early part of the mystery of the story, we think, goes away, evaporates. And it also meant that the audience wasn't ahead of Bond, which is always another quite a good idea when you're doing this kind of thriller, is that the protagonist, the leading man, should really be ahead of the game and not catching up with the audience. So we wanted the audience to be in the same position as Bond and not really know what was happening. And once we decided to do it, we never ever missed it. And we do, as you'll see later on in the movie, give Renard a really fabulous entrance into the film, much better than anything that was in this scene.
What's his name? Our friend from MI6.
James Bond.
One of M's more resourceful tin soldiers.
He could identify me.
Then I suppose a death is in order. His. When the time comes, I trust you won't let me down. Until then, let us toast this James Bond. You're in his hands now.
The second deleted scene is the attempt that Bond makes to save King. I had a big problem with the opening of the movie, and it became clear the problem when I first previewed it. The way the film was originally structured, the Bilbao scene was originally the pre-title sequence. When I previewed the film, the Bilbao scene really just didn't cut it. People thought, what? That's the opening of a Bond film? So I knew I'd made a mistake, and so what I knew was also that Thames chase was a really fabulous scene. And so I then had to do some quick thinking because I decided to make that whole sequence, Bilbao and the Thames chase, the beginning of the film, the pre-title of the film, so that when Pierce falls on the Millennium Dome, then you cut to the titles. Well, that meant you couldn't have a title sequence or pre-title sequence on for 20, 25 minutes. So I had to do some very, very tough cutting in that area to give us a real stand-up, grandstandy opening.
We read law at Oxford together. I always knew he'd conquer the world. Care for a drink?
Yes, thank you.
He's a man of great integrity.
Who buys stolen reports for £3 million?
Well, contrary to what you may believe, 007, the world is not populated by madmen who can hollow out volcanoes, fill them with big-breasted women, and threaten the world with nuclear annihilation.
It only takes one.
Any leads on a sniper?
No, the hotel room was clean. Professional job. Is that the stolen report?
Yes, classified from the Russian Atomic Energy Department. Assessing the Millennium Bug threat to the nuclear arsenal in the former Soviet Republic.
What would King want this for?
Well, he was led to believe the document was a secret report, identifying the terrorists who'd attacked a new oil pipeline he's building in the region. When he discovered it concerned nuclear weapons, he turned it over to me immediately.
But it doesn't exactly explain why someone would want me out of their office alive. King. The money.
Money, Benny. Stop, King.
We haven't finished checking it yet.
Well, I'm sure it's all there. If you can't trust MI6, who can you trust? King, stop! Stop!
Another scene that came under the surgeon's knife a bit is the scene with Serena Scott Thomas and Pierce. For those of you who are interested in the minutiae of Bond, especially in some of the lines, in the ancestry of some of the jokes, the line where Bond takes his sling and tosses onto the knight in armour saying, "What I do for England," now that line has appeared 3 times. It appeared in a trailer for Thunderball, it appeared in You Only Live Twice, and reappeared in The World Is Not Enough, only to get cut out.
I need a clean bill of health. You have to clear me for duty.
James, that wouldn't really be
Ethical.
practical, smart.
Well, let's just skirt the issue, shall we?
You'd have to promise to call me
Oh, yes.
this time.
Whatever the doctor orders.
And I suppose if you stayed in constant contact,
Of course.
if you showed sufficient stamina, set out all kinds of...
Strenuous activity.
I might be open to that.
Well, I want you to stay on top of things, of course. Things we do for England. Carry on.
The next little deleted scene is really one shot. It's the Aston Martin DB5 approaching the castle. The next couple of deletions refer to Q's lab. One of the challenges of doing a Bond is to find funny things for Q to be doing in his laboratory. One of the challenges of all the Bond films is to find great new toys, new devices that we can put into the narrative, and it's very, very difficult. And it's always fun with Q to try and get little jokes, little throwaway jokes, and to try things out. But of course, some of them don't work. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to figure them out, reading cutting-edge magazines, but then, in this case, the cutting edge was the film onto the cutting room floor. As I was getting into the shooting of the film, I'd already shot the Azerbaijan stuff quite early on. Something about it wasn't right. It wasn't working. It seemed too clunky, seemed too plotty. And I had to find a way to reintroduce Elektra into the film. We'd seen her at the funeral. She'd hardly said anything, and then I needed a really strong reintroduction to her because we had to think she was the leading lady of the piece and the romantic interest in the piece. So I needed a much more romantic opening. So this one really didn't cut it, the two of them driving through an oil field. It just wasn't working. And then I came up with the idea, and this was about a third of the way through the shooting. Why not junk all that? It just seemed a much more elegant way of telling the story. I didn't seem to be ramming the politics down the audience's throat, and I was able to give a much more romantic and powerful introduction to Electra. So that was interesting, because that's something that happened while we were shooting.
This must be the scenic route.
Do you know what you're looking at? There was a time when this was the most coveted spot on Earth.
Yes, I know. These oil fields were discovered at the end of the last century, seized by the Soviets in 1919. Hitler wanted them. Stalin and Khrushchev used them to fuel the Cold War.
It was my mother's people who discovered the soil. Bolsheviks slaughtered them for it. When the Soviet Union fell, this is what they left us.
Chernobyl of the oil world.
Some say the oil is in my family's blood. I say our blood is in the oil.
The last deletion is really, again, just a piece of shoe leather. It just seemed really not to add up to very much, which is a pity because it's a great location. 21st, 22nd century location for that, something really unusual. It was all for nothing because truly it didn't help the story along.
Nice of you to join us, 007.
We hit about 90 minutes ago. There's a scientist here from the International Decommissioning Agency, Dr. Jones. She's checking to see if she can find anything.
Look at that. That's not right.
What is it?
An observation rig. Travels inside the pipe looking for cracks, but there's nothing scheduled.
Shut it down.
We read law at Oxford together.
So just to entertain a little side note about some of the deletions.
We read law at Oxford together.
So just to entertain a little side note about some of the deletion in the M Bond scene about the big-breasted women, that Bruce Fairstein, who worked on 2 or 3 of the Bonds, wrote that line for the one before, Tomorrow Never Dies, and it never made it into that. So then he used it again, ever optimistic, in The World Is Not Enough, and I'm afraid it didn't make it in that either. But good news is for him it did make it into the novelization of Tomorrow Never Dies. So he did eventually get it out there, but keep trying, I think, is the motto with the Bond films. I decided to make that whole sequence, Bilbao and the Thames chase, the beginning of the film, the pre-title of the film, so that when Pierce falls on the Millennium Dome, then you cut to the titles. Well, that meant you couldn't have a title sequence or pre-title sequence on for 20, 25 minutes, so I had to do some very, very tough cutting in that area. And so I could get a sequence which lasted probably no more than 15 or 16 minutes, which is still pretty long by Bond convention for a pre-title sequence. But nonetheless, a lot of stuff had to go out of that opening. There was nothing wrong, I didn't think, with the sequence with King and Bond chasing him. It was kind of exciting and all that, but it simply made that opening much, much more protracted than it needed to have been. And I'm pretty pleased, in fact, that I made that decision. A, the film has a really strong start by putting the Bilbao and the Thames sequences together. And also there's a kind of Christmas in the filmmaking, a sort of energy in it, which I liked. But that's really the reason why you see the deleted scenes here with King and with 007 and with M, is that I just had to compress them and really just take only the bits I really needed. pretty clear when you see this deleted scene that these don't work. We wanted to give the effect of kind of reverse static, where someone's hair shoots up on end. And the only way we could do it was to turn the poor woman playing the role upside down. And you can see from the muscles in her face that she's upside down, so it was kind of embarrassing. And then the other thing, when someone gooses and up he flies like that, that was pretty lame too. I'm a documentary filmmaker as well as a movie maker, and one of the first things I did when I got the job of doing The World Is Not Enough, having read the script and seeing that it was all about the Caspian and about getting gas and gasoline out of the Caspian, I insisted we all went off to Azerbaijan to have a look at the real place where it happened, just to see if there was anything there that was really unusual. And of course there was. There's this amazing kind of wasteland of just paraphernalia, gasoline paraphernalia. The Russians, just when the Soviet Empire was disbanded, the Soviets just left, the Russians just left Azerbaijan and just left this oil field just to rot away. And I thought this was incredibly photogenic, so I did this scene.